finally today, some follow-up to the whole Hollywood-going streaming story that we got into over the weekend, as Peter Kafka enlightened us on Saturday. Yeah, the whole move by Warner Media to take the leap off the cliff with all of their 2021 movies is maybe a bigger leap than we thought. Here's a bit from Ben Thompson's newsletter just this morning. Quote, "Make no mistake, said cost is going to be substantial. Release windows exist for a reason. They allow studios to wring the maximum amount of revenue out of the huge amount of fixed costs that go into making modern theatrical releases. That is why Disney has, at least until the pandemic, remained committed to theaters. The company would quite like to continue making $1 billion per tentpole movie in theaters and only incurring the cost of going vertical, i.e. keeping its content on Disney Plus, once it comes to less valuable release windows. Warner Media, though, is basically sacrificing the entire Warner Brothers division that earned $14.4 billion in revenue in 2019 and $2.4 billion in profit. The sacrifice isn't total. The HBO Max strategy only applies to the U.S., which was 45% of Warner Brothers' revenue, but it's pretty significant. Moffett-Nathanson estimated that this change could cost Warner Brothers 50% of its domestic theatrical audience and 10% of its international audience, thanks to VPNs, plus 40% of its home video revenue, which means a $1.2 billion shortfall without any attendant decrease in costs. Assuming $12 annual revenue per user for HBO Max retail customers, that means this shift has to drive 8.4 million new customers, and that's just to break even in 2021, never mind every year that follows. That's harder than it looks because remember, there are already 20 million HBO subscribers who already get HBO Max for free, but haven't yet activated HBO Max. I'm sure Warner Media will be happy to convert them, low IQ or not, but said conversion isn't going to add anything to the bottom line. Instead, those 8.4 million customers will need to come from the part of the market that has never been interested in HBO in the first place, which raises the question as to why exactly Warner Media felt the need to degrade the HBO brand with those that cared to attract those that didn't. In short, for all of Killar's arguments that this is about doing right by customers, it is difficult to see this move as anything other than AT&T destroying a huge amount of value at Warner Media for the sake of a watered-down and bloated HBO Max that will ultimately have about the same size customer base as HBO did previously, but without the same cachet and pool with creative talent, end quote. And according to a piece in the Financial Times, even at Disney, which has seemingly had so much success moving to digital, this is probably still a time of huge risk in terms of endangering the value of legacy businesses. For example, we've been talking about movies, but what about TV? Quote, "As the group re-engineers itself around video streaming, giving up lucrative licensing revenue, it must also manage the decline of its aging TV channels and movie studios. Taking the longer view, Bob Iger, executive chairman and former chief executive, recently told friends that once mighty channels such as Disney-owned ABC were, quote, over, and that Disney's future was streaming and theme parks. But unlike the loss-making Disney Plus, TV networks bring in billions of dollars a year. The predicament has left Disney with an uneven strategy for TV channels such as the sports network ESPN and the entertainment networks that feed Hulu, the US-only streaming service Disney took majority control of last year. It also reveals that even for the world's best-positioned traditional media company, the transition to streaming will be bumpy and financially uncertain. Adapting sports to streaming is particularly punishing because media companies have to pay hundreds of millions of dollars every few years for the broadcast rights to games. Prices have risen as broadcasters such as Fox and NBC have looked to compete with ESPN, locking the network into a costly, rigid business model that would be difficult to convert. When they did those deals, they did not anticipate ESPN would go from 95 million subs to 80 million, said a former senior Disney executive. In the long term, it created a real question about how ESPN can be profitable, end quote. To match its cable profits, ESPN Plus would need to be priced at $40 to $45 a month, according to the former chief executive of one streaming service who warned that, quote, "There is not a spreadsheet in the universe that gives you similar economics to pay TV," end quote. In the latest quarter, ESPN Plus reached 10 million subscribers who paid on average only $4.54 a month. Why doesn't The Bachelor premiere on Hulu? Said Rich Greenfield, partner at Lightshed Research Group, referring to ABC's hit dating show. The question is, how far does the TV universe have to decline before they decide to start shifting high-profile content over? It would rewrite their whole economic livelihood, end quote. Yeah, classic innovator dilemma stuff here, which is why I'm so fascinated by it. If you're Disney and you own ESPN, you can't do without sports, obviously, but does the math for sports even work in streaming when you have those huge fixed costs of the rights packages and such? And if you think Disney can just jettison, say, ABC to do things like put The Bachelor on streaming or maybe move A&E programming to streaming, it's worth recognizing that Disney got $6 billion in operating income from their cable channels just this year. Given the softness to their theme parks business, to their cruise ships business, to their lack of traditional box office income, it's probably not exaggerating too much to say that it's those cable channels that are keeping Disney afloat at the moment. This is the same Sophie's Choice dilemma that the record labels faced a decade ago. Sure, there's lots of growth in digital, but is there a lot of profitable growth? We shall see.